Hey, hey, put down the cake, finish up your drink, pick up the Bible, and let's start rocking this thing. Come on. Well, welcome to another C Group. I trust that things are going very well and that by this time you should really be getting to know the people that are in your group and they should be getting to know you. And I trust that you're coming closer to each other and that you're taking a step closer to Christ. And in all of the stuff that we've been talking about and doing, that your soul is just kind of waking up a little bit. Now this week, we're going to explore the faithfulness of God. That is the faithfulness of God. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 in verse 23, Paul talks about this connection of body, soul, and spirit. He mentions that in those verses. And then he throws in kind of this weird verse after that. And it almost seems like it's out of place. And if you're reading it, you're like, Paul, what are you saying? He talks about body, soul, and spirit. And then he says this, the one who calls you is faithful and he will do it. The one who calls you is faithful and he will do it. What's Paul talking about there? Well, he says the one who calls you is faithful. That is, God is the one who's called us, and that God is faithful. So Paul's saying, God is faithful and he will do it. He will do what? That God will help us in this process of becoming set apart, becoming holy, which we call sanctification. So he's saying that God's faithful to do what he promised, that God says he's going to do some things and he's faithful to do it. Why would Paul say that? Why would he throw that sentence in? I think it's because Paul knew that on our journey, we would sometimes be tempted to wonder if God is at work or not. Somewhere between the promise and the fulfillment of that promise is kind of this no man's land. And we begin to question, is God really at work? Is God doing things? Right? It was kind of like one of the first questions of the Bible. Did God really say? We'll begin to question what God said. But he's saying, remember, God's faithful. And so it's as if Paul is saying, don't forget that between the promise and the fulfillment of the promise, that God is faithful. So I remember when I was a kid, that my uncle would stop by every now and then. And one time when he stopped by, he said to my brother and I, and we were young. I mean, we were like, I don't even think we were teenagers yet. And he said, you know, maybe next time I come by, I'll bring that little mini bike that I have. Would you guys be interested in that? To a young boy, asking him if he's interested in a mini bike. Yes, please. And so his kids had grown and he had this, it was like a late 60s or early 70s Honda Trail 70. Phenomenal bike. Even when I hear one run now, it like takes me back to my childhood, and they're just great, great bikes. And so he said, you know what? When I come up sometime, I'll just bring that and you guys can hang on to that and you can just have fun with it. He like made a promise. I mean, as a kid, I'm like, you promising? He's made a promise that he's going to do that. And so he didn't come around like super often, but he would come around a couple times, and I noticed that he came around, he didn't bring it. You know, and the next time he showed up, he didn't bring it. But yet I still kind of held out this hope because my uncle promised that he was going to do that. And I remember it was one day that he drove into our driveway, and I was upstairs in our house, and I peeled back the curtains, and I looked, and in the back, sticking out the back of his green station wagon, was a red Honda Trail 70. And for a kid, that like changes your life. But here's what I knew is that my uncle had promised something and then he had fulfilled his promise. So my uncle in that case was incredibly faithful because he did what he said. And in the in-between time, I was looking for the bike to come because I thought that my uncle was going to be faithful and that he was going to deliver on it. So today in your C groups, you're going to look at what God has promised in the Bible. A couple things that you're going to do. You're going to look at what God has promised, some of his biblical promises, and then you're going to be asked to share some of those promises that have come true in your life. So remember some of the rules of C Group. Be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to speak out and to share and encourage one another. So your leader is going to lead you through that practice with some different scriptures of the promises of God, and then you're going to look at that and say, well, here's how that promise has come true in my life. And so my hope is that it'll be an encouragement to you, and especially that you'll find great encouragement if you're in that season between what God has promised and the fulfillment of that promise.